Hello, BookTube. Well, it's the last day of February. Tomorrow is March, no matter what the weather seems like, no matter how much it feels like this last week of news, of world news especially, has just made it feel like it's been 10 years. But nevertheless, March is right around the corner. And typically on BookTube, that provokes people to make videos looking forward to the month ahead. What are they expecting? What are they hoping will be good? What are they pre-ordering? That sort of thing. BookTube TBRs that look forward to the next month. Always a pleasant thing to know what's on people's radar, and yet a difficult thing for me to emulate here on this channel because I am a book reviewer and I do a huge amount of advanced reading. I do a huge amount of reading well ahead of the month that we're in. There are quite a few people in the book reviewing world that like and rely on that advanced reading, and I'm happy to provide the service. So I've read a lot of March books already. I've commissioned reviews on a lot of them and will review a lot of them myself. And we've gone over a lot of them on this channel, one way or another. Either I hadn't read them at the time, or I had read them and was wanted to recommend them to you. I thought I'd make a video like that. I typically call these things TBR-BYs, to be read by you. This is not meant to be a prediction of March's best books, because there are quite a few books in March I haven't read yet. And best is also a function of time, right? So it'll be the end of the year that I will know what March's best books are. I won't know them at the end of March. I certainly don't know them now, at the beginning of March. But I wanted to show you a handful of books and put them on your radar in case they interest you. I've got them on the iPad here, and the first one, most of these are things we've seen already. The first one is the new Barry Strauss book. I wanted to put it on your radar. I have read it. It's very good. This is The War That Made the Roman Empire. And this is about the Battle of Actium. The Battle of Actium is the kernel at the core of this book. The Battle of Actium did not last that long. It could not fill a whole book unless you were to do some very granular military analysis of it, moment by moment. But otherwise, this is the stories of the people involved, the stories of the death of Julius Caesar, which this author has already covered in a book of its own, and the struggle for power that happened after that, with the biggest stakes in the world on the table. Culminating eventually in some of the greatest personalities of the age actually fighting each other for control of the Roman Empire. And those personalities really, I mean, the study of Actium in here, I've read better, but I've read worse. It's the personalities in this book that really are the key to it. It's just an amazingly readable thing. This author is really good at that sort of thing, and this is no exception. I expect this to do brisk business in March. I expect it to get reviewed a lot. I wonder, there are a couple of points down in the depths of the book that specialists might argue with. There were a couple of points in here, a couple of stretches of conjecture that I myself do not agree with. But one way or another, I expect that this will be widely reviewed, and it deserves it. It was really, really good. Same thing with this next one. Most of these are recommends, obviously, for a TBR-BY. They would be recommends. And this is something, again, that we've seen before. This is by Ron Franchel, and this is Shadow Man. It's about a murderer who snatched a young woman right out of her tent when she was camping with her family. One minute she's there, and the next minute she's gone. And this happened a long time ago, and the investigator of the crime had heard that the FBI at Quantico was coming up with a way to profile serial killers, using the word profile as a verb, a way to profile them, a way to analyze what we know about what they do in order to predict what they will do next. Now, profiling is extremely common currency now in pop culture. You've all heard of it. There have been whole TV shows devoted to it. But it was brand new when the events in this book were unfolding, and was looked upon by a lot of law enforcement as voodoo. Nothing to be relied upon. Nothing at all to be relied upon. Nothing to waste manpower on. So the personalities involved here of that investigator and the pioneers of profiling, again, drive the book, because they're facing an uphill battle in terms of knowing that they have a tool that could potentially save lives and facing an enormous amount of institutional inertia. The author does a fantastic job with this, just fantastic. Even if you aren't typically a reader of what this book is, which is true crime, I typically am not a true crime reader. Even if you aren't a true crime reader, just put this on your list because you're going to find it fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. Then the next one, another thing that I have recommended many, many times. I'm a recent convert to this series, but I cannot praise it highly enough. Again, if you have control of a book inventory of some kind at your school or at your library or your book club or something like that, your bookstore, you should invest in this series. It's only 3 books long, and people are going to love it. You read it, you will know if you're in that position. Readers tend to love series. They tend to want a new series, not just a good new book, but a whole series. And this is one. Oh my! This is Sea Storm by Andrew Mayne. This is the next book in the underwater investigation series, starring a young woman who does that for a living in Florida. She conducts underwater investigations, cars that go off roads, bodies that are found in shallow water, that sort of thing. And it's amazing. The first book, as you can see on the cover, is The Girl Beneath the Sea. It's not all that old a book. I'm sure that you could find a used copy. You could start there, but this is a very good example of a series where it doesn't matter where you jump in. The author has you covered. The author is extremely prolific. He's done this many, many times before. He knows not to leave any readers behind. You'd be amazed how many writers don't realize that, but he gets it. And Sea Storm is amazing. Just amazingly involving and atmospheric, just like the other volumes have been. So this is, in a way, I'm recommending this book, but I'm also recommending this series. If you are the type who reads books in series, especially fiction thrillers like this, oh my, don't wait until this is 10 books old. Jump on it now, is my advice. And then the next one, name that will be familiar to some of you, especially in the scholarly end of the pool. The name is John Dominic Crossan. He's a great biblical scholar. And this is his new book, Render Unto Caesar, which is... It takes a very convoluted subject, which is what fidelity do Christians owe to the real world, to the world around them, as opposed to the dictates of their faith and their Lord. What do they owe to the world around them? Like, for instance, one attitude, a very compliant social attitude in the Gospel of St. Luke and in the Acts of the Apostles, versus a very stridently anti-social, anti-government attitude conveyed in, for instance, the book of Revelation. Where do you draw the line? How do you differentiate the path that you want to take if you yourself are a Christian? John Dominic Crossan is not writing just to Christians. He also knows how to tell a story. This is a scholarly work, but very accessible. But a large chunk of this is aimed at Christians, I would imagine. I would imagine that John Dominic Crossan thought to write this book because he is under the opinion that this is still a conflict today, that Christians still don't know what to do, often don't know what line to walk between the dictates of their faith and the dictates of their society. I myself have always been a little bit confused by that. Never mind what Acts has to say, never mind what Revelation has to say. I would think that the absolute arbiter of any issue for a Christian would be whether or not Jesus Christ actually said something directly on the subject. And he did. It's right there in the title of the book. but there's been a whole bunch of commentary since then, and it's still going on. It's present even in the lunatic fringe here in America, the home of the lunatic fringe, with evangelical Christian churches saying that they are fervently against a free and effective vaccine for a deadly virus, and claiming a faith-based reason for being so, despite the fact that whole rows of their congregation are suddenly empty the next week. So it is definitely still a live question. If you're interested in this sort of thing and want historical grounding, boy, you'll never find a better guide than John Dominic Crossan, just never. Then the next one we've seen on this channel before. I think we saw every iteration of this, the electronic copy, the advanced copy, and the finished copy. But it's great, so I want to recommend it again. It's coming out in March. Again, it won't appeal to everybody, but those of you out there who will appeal to at least know that it's coming. This is edited by Daniel Mark Epstein, and this is Rapture and Melancholy, the very first edition of the diaries of the great poet Edna St. Vincent Millay, which is of inherent interest if you love this poet, maybe less interest if you don't, and a little bit of an uphill battle if you're not completely committed to it, because Epstein is completely committed to it and sometimes allows that to cloud his vision so that he isn't always explaining in the footnotes everything that you need to understand the letters on the page. Sometimes that happens. If you're following along, if you read it, for instance, like a book, instead of dipping in and out, then you won't have that problem, because he does explain everything in this book. It's just he doesn't often revisit those explanations or remind you of them. So it's, not for everybody, but a terrific addition, a vital, really, an unprecedented addition to the literature of Anna St. Vincent Millay. So I gobbled it up and loved it. Okay, then we have an Everyman's Library reprint. Some of you will know them. They're very pretty. They're very nice, and they have a new one coming out in March, and it's something that's been reprinted many, many times, but well worth your time. We've talked many times on this channel about the Mitford sisters, and how... Oh, are you trying to sing a song? No, you're just being extra annoying. Okay, all right. We've talked many times about the Mitford sisters and how wacky they were and how the funny nicknames that they came up with for each other, and even starring in a series of murder mysteries. And one of the dangers of chuckling at the Mitford sisters is that it might lead us to forget that there was some real talent in that family, real talent. And one of the most talented was Nancy Mitford. And the new Everyman's Library volume collects The Pursuit of Love and Love in a Cold Climate. There she is when she was so young. And these are very acid comic novels. They are wonderful, absolutely wonderful. If, for instance, you are one of the refreshingly large number of people on BookTube who loves Cold Comfort Farm, you must not miss these books. You might have missed them, but you must not miss them. If Cold Comfort Farm registers with you, these will register with you, and you'll have a pretty new edition in your bookstore. We won't have many more here, don't worry. The next one I think we've seen on this channel, it's enormous. It would definitely count as a mammoth for March of the Mammoths. Again, like with the John Dominic Crossan, it won't appeal to everybody. It appealed to me, very much so, but it's also really good. It's well done. This is Marcus Friedrich, and this is A New History of the Jesuits. I don't want to block the bean's face, but she's being a little diva. I want you to be able to see both the book and the bean. The problems with this channel, I tell you. This is huge. It's soup to nuts. It's the Jesuits have had many, many one-volume histories. Most infamously, maybe Malachi Martin's. That was just so howlingly bad. I mean, it had mistakes on every page, and somehow got through. Not really sure how, but it makes entertaining reading, but you can't trust any of it. And what good is that if it's a history of something that's still going on today? This is not like that. This is heavily researched. It can be a little bit thick going. You really have to be committed. Here she goes. God help us. I swear, the problems I have on this channel dealing with her diva antics and your diva antics. Am I the only one here who's humble and self-effacing? Anyway, if you are in the mood for a long haul on a Christian religious order, this is the book for you. And the way that I can sweeten that decision, at least a little, is by saying that this author does a great job of the context, of providing the larger world. So not only do you get everything you want to know about the Jesuits here, but you get why you'd want to know it. You get the broader social context. It's a big work, but it is going to be March of the Mammoths. We'll move from something that's a little bit of an undertaking to something that is very easy, like falling off a log. This is by the great Eloisa James. This is a romance novel called How to Be a Wallflower. I think we've seen this already. Absolutely delightful. This author, I cannot praise her highly enough. She's never written anything that I didn't love. This is fantastic. It is the story of a young woman who is coming out to society and is absolutely determined to have none of it. She thinks it's nonsense. She refuses to wed, and her one of her strategies to make sure that happens is to hunt through London for the ugliest clothing imaginable to make her debut a complete failure, practically sackcloth and ashes. And believe it or not, that quest brings her up against a willful American. It throws them into conflict with each other in the funniest, least likely way imaginable, so that almost from page 10, you're just smiling from ear to ear while you read this. And sometimes you want a book that will do that. I think we can all agree on that, right? Sometimes you want a book that will do that. A lot of you will have been introduced to this author by what I consider to be her most successful book, not just commercially, but artistically as well. As a book, My American Duchess, I think, reigns supreme of all of her books. Eloisa James fans may say otherwise, but it's certainly my favorite. But boy, oh boy, did this come close. just sparkling. We don't have many more to go. Don't worry. Okay, then we have, this is being billed by its author as a fantasy novel. It's actually much closer to YA. just to be warned, we've seen that before on this channel, and I've seen it in the industry in the last 2 or 3 years of publishers either blurring that line or lying about it, and that you just have to be wary of that. But this is really good, so I wanted to put it on the list. This is by Tara Sim, and it's The City of Dusk. This is the first book in a new epic fantasy series in which 4 main characters each wield a certain kind of power, a certain shard of the whole of the magic systems in this world. And they have conflicting motives at first about saving their city and their world, but then they realize they actually do have basically the same goal. And again, this is a note that I'm hitting over and over again in this particular TBR-BY, but nevertheless, the world building here is wonderful. The atmosphere is wonderful. The secondary characters are almost all well realized. But the real key to this book is the personalities, the 4 personalities. I'm a little bit surprised in 2022 that Tara Sim had one of the 4 characters be a man. Men are slowly disappearing from fantasy novels just in general, and it was a little bit. It's gotten so bad. It's gotten to such a point that when I start to read a new fantasy novel, I am surprised if any main character aside from the villain, is a man. And one of the characters here is a man. But aside from that little Twitter-inspired rant, this is extremely well done. Whether it is technically YA or not, it was immensely involving. So I definitely want to recommend it. If you're in the mood for epic fantasy that's well done, this is coming out in March, and you couldn't do worse. So, or you couldn't do better, I should say. Okay, then this next one is something that we've seen on this channel before. I wholeheartedly recommend it. This is by Jack Davis, and this is The Bald Eagle, a big, sprawling natural history of America's bird. Natural history of the bald eagle, the history of humans dealing with the bald eagle hasn't always been cherished. Right up to the present day, but oh boy. Some of you may know this author from his book, The Gulf, about the Gulf of Mexico. That bowled me away. I just loved it. And this is fantastic. Just a fantastic, big, block, freestanding example of popular natural history. A kind of writing that I dearly, dearly love. I don't know that I'm going to encounter a better example of it this year than this thing, so I definitely wanted to include it in this list. Okay, and then we'll wrap up with what may be in many ways the best book that's coming out in March for nonfiction. This is After the Romanovs by the great Helen Rappaport. And this is the story of all of the people, working class, middle class, artisan class, geniuses, nobility, who fled from the Russian Revolution and the fall of the Romanovs. In other words, a massive, all-encompassing social catastrophe in Russia, but with the rail line still running, right? With the steamer ships still going. So not a closed catastrophe, a catastrophe from which people could flee with the clothes on their back or a train of servants. And I just always underestimate this author. I would not have thought that such a compelling story could be made out of such varied, wild strains of narrative, and she does it, and she makes it look easy. So if you're interested in this period, if you're interested in Belle Epoque France and all of the geniuses that fermented there, boy, oh boy. Boy, oh boy. Of course, the main thing I can say about this book is that you don't need to be interested in what this author writes. You just need to look for her name. That's all. She won't let you down. And this book doesn't at all. I hope that it is widely reviewed in March. I hope that it does well. But then again, I hope that for all of these books. So there you go. That is a March TBR-BY for you for 2022. And I will try to remember to do a look back at March at the end of the month as well. We'll maybe cover some different books. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up for now, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.